Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing. You can now get a free Black Stack beer over at Twins Daily soon. We're going to be doing an opening day party there, so you're going to want to check that out. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
I like
Actually,
you like
still
free beer at Twins Daily, as if like people can go through the saloon doors and enter Twins Daily. That's your next step, by the way.
Big opening day party at Black Stack Brewing. We'll have the details next week. You can sign up and get a free beer, free Black Stack. Yeah, I am in Fort Myers for just this episode, and then I am leaving tomorrow. So I will be back. We'll be doing in-person podcasts again, I think, starting on Wednesday next week.
You don't know. Maybe I'm going somewhere, John.
Maybe you are. Are you?
No.
No.
Of course not. The other day I walked across the street. That was pretty good. It's like, hey, sat on a bench across the street.
I heard you were. I have a report that you were driving around in a car yesterday.
Well, I had to go get a haircut. So, got a wedding in a couple of weeks, and Becky was like, "You cannot show up looking like that." Because I went. Okay. I don't know if this is interesting at all, but I almost got my head shaved yesterday accidentally because I went to Great Clips. This is not an ad, believe me. I wouldn't recommend going there to anyone really, but I went. And it's where you sign in online, you know. So I come in and there's like 7 names on the board, and I'm the first one, Aaron. But I noticed there's another Aaron, like Aaron K is like number 7. Oh. So the lady checks me in and says, "Oh, we're ready for you." And a different lady takes me. But I noticed that the name that disappears from the list is Aaron K, not me.
Oh.
So I go, "Oh, whatever." I don't know. So I sit down and the lady takes out the buzzer, like the clippers.
Right.
And she says, I forget what she called it.
Same as last time?
She goes, same as last time, 0 setting? Or whatever it's called. And I'm like,
yeah.
Wait, is that like shaved? And she goes, oh, yeah, that's like bald. And I go, no, because if you do that, I don't think it's coming back. Like I think at this point, the hair will quit.
Right.
Like,
yeah, that's it.
And then what I witnessed from that point, when I explained to her the Aaron, dual Aarons, she like scolded the other lady in front of me and was like yelling at her. And I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And now I have to sit here and get my hair cut. Anyway, that's what I was doing yesterday. It was very exciting.
Very exciting.
Highlight of definitely my week. And so that's what happens when I leave the house. I get confused for other people. I almost get my head shaved. And then people yell at each other around me. So it's lovely to talk to you as a change of pace for that. I think like,
I rarely yell at you or at other people, really.
Yeah, you're not really. When John gets mad, which I enjoy, because it's usually not. It's occasionally with me, and it's usually warranted if it is with me, which is fine. I can take it. I like to think I dish it out and can take it. That's up for debate, probably. Becky might have a different opinion of that. Although she told me that the other day, we've been together 10 plus years. I've never yelled at her once. And I said, I don't think I ever would yell at you. Like, why would I yell at you? Anyway, I reserve that for John.
Dan Hayes.
Well, true. But the beauty of John is like once a year, he'll yell at someone and it's just glorious. It's like, oh my God, welcome to the dark side, brother. Like, oh, I've been waiting for you here. And then I think to myself, how do I convince him that this is fun and he should do it more often? And I don't mean like yelling at the person in person. I'd be like yelling towards me about the person.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just disparaging somebody.
Yeah, right. That's dragging them down into the muck.
You exactly right. You just want me to disparage the people you like to disparage. That's it.
Yeah. It's I don't like confrontation, but it's fun to watch other people in confrontation. Although when they're about to shave your head, there's a little risk element to it. Because I was like, this lady could just get mad, and I'm walking out of here bald. But honestly, whatever. So we're less than 2 weeks now until opening day in St. Louis. We're recording this on Friday morning, we should say. The Twins have made a couple rounds of cuts. They're down now to 45 players in camp for what will be a 26-man roster. There's going to be the next round of cuts might have some interesting names to it. I don't mean interesting like, oh, I know that prospect. I mean interesting like, oh, I thought maybe this guy could have an outside crack at the team, but we probably have the opening day roster. But there's probably one more slice to make before you get to the real meat of it here, but it's coming. And the thing that I think makes it really apparent to me, even just looking at the game situations that we're closing in on this thing, is you're starting to see starting pitchers go a second time through lineups.
Yep.
Past 3 innings, let's say. You're going to start to see that in the upcoming week, basically, because they got to get to like 75 plus pitches, 4 to 5 innings to feel comfortable going into the season. And then the other thing, and this is partly due being later in camp, and partly due to, I think, and you probably have been there for Baldelli talking about this, wanting to get hitters more reps, like the main guys, in an effort to a theory that they have to avoid another cold hitting April, is like, let's get these guys way more at bats than they've gotten in some past years. And I was looking at some of the numbers, and I think Bobby might have written about this for the Strib yesterday or today. A lot of the regulars, the Wallners and the Brooks Lees and the Correas and stuff like that, they're already at or above last year's total at bats for spring training. That's how you can tell we're getting late here, because Jeffers caught 7 or 8 innings last game, which he's trying to get ready for the season. Starting pitchers are starting to go past 3 innings. We're closing in here, so it's fun, because as much as it's fun when the spring training starts, because we've spent so many months talking about off-season junk, the middle of spring training is really monotonous, because not just. And so now you can see the finish line at least. So I like that.
Well, I mean, you're also starting to see on a semi-regular basis, really, like what we think is going to be the starting lineup in a game. Like tonight, we've got a split squad, and so what you've got at the home game is basically all the guys who are going to be starting, probably your starters in one of the games, and then basically all the guys competing for a job in another game, and that's sort of what we've been seeing back and forth now for the last week. Like, I think Monday's game versus the Phillies, I took a look and I said, this could be the opening day lineup. And then Wednesday night at Boston, I thought, this could be the opening day lineup. And today I'm taking a look at what they're starting at home, and I think this could be the opening day lineup. So it's you are seeing at this time of the year, this time of spring, you're almost always starting to see that a little bit. What's been a surprise is up to this point how often we have seen those guys play, and including going on the road to play in games. So,
and I think that goes back to, and I mean, like, I don't know, you might have some actual quotes from Baldelli on this last few days, but like clearly they're making an effort to get guys, let's say, I don't know, 55 at bats in spring training instead of 40 at bats in spring training, and that might seem what's the difference? And I'm not saying that's going to cure what ailed them last April, or just in general. I feel like they've had some pretty bad Aprils hitting wise, but it's what we've talked about a lot. When something doesn't go well, you flip the coin and do what's on the other side of the coin. That doesn't mean that's going to go well, but that's the easiest thing to do. So instead of a lot of teams, and the Twins, I think, have been part of this line of thinking with a bunch of other teams, which is, well, we don't want to wear out our regulars in spring training. Like, we want to get them some reps. We want to get the juices flowing a little bit, but we don't need them to be worn out before the season begins. Well, I think there's plenty of logic to that, and a lot of teams agree. And by the way, a lot of teams who take that approach have great offenses. However, the Twins did not. And so it's very easy to flip the coin and go, all right, now we're giving the regulars a whole bunch of at-bats, and we'll see how that goes. And it might not ever, there might not be a right way to do it, but it is interesting. And I think for guys like Wallner, who really struggled last spring and got off to a pretty slow start this spring, has started to hit the ball a little bit better. We talked a little bit we had Phil Miller of the Star Tribune on the Patreon podcast, 2 days ago, and went through a whole bunch of stuff with him. And one of the things we talked about is, like, it's a weird spring is so weird because we focus, as Phil repeatedly pointed out, on the last roster spots, like the least consequential players, really, like the 13th position player and the 8th reliever. Those guys get talked about so much more than the Buxtons and Correas and Royce Lewis. And we were talking with Phil, like, Correa's hitting like 050, and no one cares. No one cares, really. As long as his foot feels okay, and I'll extend that to Buxton and Lewis too. That trio is, where the Twins season goes. We talked about it coming into last year. If those three can play 300 games combined, the Twins are going to be really, really good. And they didn't get there, obviously. But given all of their injury histories, not only last season, but just overall for their careers, no news is good news with them. Like the fact that Correa could go 0 for 50, but if he's, running around decently and not saying that his foot hurts, great. And Buxton could be wrapped up in bubble wrap for the entire 6 weeks. But as long as he is as healthy as he ended last season, which it sounds like he is, and the same thing with Lewis too. So, the news we tend to talk about is either bad news with injuries or really kind of low stakes stuff. But that's the changes that, we know, like you said, we have a pretty clear picture of, at least I would say, the top, 5, maybe 6 spots in the opening day lineup, probably.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
would say at this point. And not only can you do that math just based on who's good and who has track records and all that, Baldelli showed his hand with that pretty quickly, putting Wallner in the leadoff spot. I think it's going to be Wallner number 1. This is against right-handed pitchers. Wallner number 1, Correa 2, Buxton 3, Larnach 4 probably to break up the righties. Then you have Lewis 5th, and I would guess I guess you could have Miranda, France, or Jeffers 6th.
Yeah.
It's going to be 6, 7, 8 basically in some form there.
I'll tell you what it is tonight, which I think we've got. I think we've got again sort of the lineup. Jeffers 6th, Castro 7th. Castro's playing second base. France batting 8th, and then Bader batting 9th.
Right.
So,
yeah, the Castro, Lee, and maybe Julian as a second base competition. But also then Castro, it's interesting because Castro is in many ways the easiest guy to predict, or one of the easier guys to predict. He's going to play a lot, and he's going to play everywhere.
Right.
But where he kind of begins this, the role he begins the season is typically not the role he plays all season, and sometimes not even the role he plays a week into the season. Each of the last 2 years, he's began the season as a bench guy. No clear starting role. And that might be the case this year if he doesn't, outright win the second base competition.
Right.
But we also know within 10 games or something, he's going to be in the lineup every day, and he's probably going to be playing somewhere pretty regularly. So,
and he's got the switch hitter thing going for him as well, which Rocco just loves having that in the lineup someplace. That's one of the reasons he liked having Santana in there every day, and I think it's one of the reasons why it's another thing that Brooks Lee might be bringing to the equation if he ends up winning the second base job. So, yeah, he loves having that guy bat 6th or 7th. You've got Castro, kind of breaking up a right-handed lineup of Lewis, Jeffers, France, Bader. You can throw, your switch hitter into the middle of that, so as not to be too susceptible to a right-handed pitcher. So.
Yeah, I think you can sort of map out their lineup by using the 3, or it could be 4, I guess, the 3 non-right-handed hitters. So, Wallner, it appears, will lead off because, A, they think he's one of the best hitters on the team, and you want to get him the most plate appearances. But then B, that allows you to go 2 righties, second and third, probably Correa and Buxton. And then by the same token, Larnach, who's another lefty, batting 4th, not necessarily because they think he's one of the 4 best hitters, but because he's probably one of the 5 best hitters, and he's left-handed, which then allows you to break up those righties and then follow that with Lewis and probably another righty, 5-6, whether it's Miranda, France, Jeffers, whoever. And then, like we just said, if it's Castro or Lee, can bat 7th, let's say, and then that provides another break. So we've seen years where you could kind of do the reverse of that, and you could kind of map out the lineup based on where the righties are. Mean, back in the old Gardenhire days where the lineup was just all lefties. It was, you had the Mauer-Morneau era, but you also had the Koski, Jock Jones, Przynski. Minkiewicz, they just had so many left-handed hitters that they developed that you could almost say, okay, well, let's try to kind of backfill the lineup around Michael Kadire because he's the right-handed bat, 3rd or 4th or whatever. And now it's the opposite because they really, potentially the strength of this team is the trio we talked about, which is Correa, Buxton, Lewis, who are all right-handed. But then beyond that, they're still hoping for some pretty big things from Miranda and France and Jeffers.
And Larnick. I mean,
Yeah, he's left-handed.
I agreed. Yes, but I think the way that works is if you've got Larnick actually being a productive cleanup hitter, essentially. One of the things that Rocco also talked about, we talked about year after year after year, like he really liked going right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left as much as he could. And one of the things that he said in spring training, as we kind of talked about him building the lineups, was he doesn't really feel the need to do that anymore, in part because he thinks doing that makes him susceptible to left-handed pitching. That the right-handers don't always kill the left-handed pitchers that are in between. You're not making the left-hander pay as much. He'd rather, and meanwhile, when they bring in right-handers, he feels like his right-handers can handle right-handed pitching. So he feels perfectly comfortable doing, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, right, right, something like that.
I still think he would like to do that, but they don't really have the personnel.
That's part of it too.
To do that. And the reason you want to alternate handedness, let's say, in the lineup, which is, by the way, why everyone loves switch hitters. While Baldelli loved Polanco and he loved Santana and loves Castro, because that can allow you to do a lot of things in terms of alternating. But it's like a free space, basically, in the middle. But the reason you generally want to alternate is to shield the lefties, not shield the righties. For the most part, and I think this is definitely true with the group of righties that the Twins have, like you said, they hit everyone. And that's not to say righties aren't going to be better against lefties. They are, for the most part. But the platoon splits are much less extreme generally with righties. And so if you are going to build a lineup, well, it's funny. I would rather build a lineup with a bunch of lefties because I think they will more consistently really crush right-handed pitching. But that approach requires having platoon partners for those guys, right-handed bench guys for those Larnicks and Wallners and all that, and the Twins just don't really have that on the current potential opening day roster. And so if you don't have that, we've talked endlessly about this, a corner outfielder who can knock around lefties, then it is probably a better or at least more consistent approach to have a lineup dominated mostly by righties because they can play against both. They don't really need to play platooned, and obviously it helps that righties are probably their three best players, or at least their three highest upside all-around players, Lewis, Correa, Buxton, I would say.
Yeah. Yep.
So, that helps with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the last bench spots, but we should note that, like we said, we had Phil Miller on the Patreon 2 days ago and got a bunch of good topics with him. So what we're going to do at the end of this episode is include like a little clip, I think it's like 15 minutes, of Phil talking with us because it's a fun clip. It includes two things. It starts with a very funny story that Phil tells about something that happened 15 years ago in the Twins clubhouse.
Yes.
And then it also includes a little back and forth with Phil about how we think the second base or how he thinks the second base competition is going to play out and the effect that could have on the bench, and also kind of the Mickey Gasper odds of making the last bench spot or claiming the last bench spot, because he's been one of the standout performers in camp. So we talked to Phil about all that and got a funny story. So we're going to include that at the end of this episode. So if you can make it through us, you get some good stuff from Phil.
That's right. You'll get a taste of the Patreon. We always recommend that you check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We generally record Mondays and Wednesdays on the Patreon. It's $1 an episode for like another few days. After that, it's going to be switching to $8 a month, but you'll be getting $8 worth of episodes for sure. It's less than the cost of a beer at Target Field. And it's a great little club. It's ad-free. We have a mailbag. We have special guests like Phil Miller on it. And we've got immediate reactions to big games. And we might be throwing some other new stuff in there as well as we kind of develop that out a little bit. So
I think we're going to probably Monday, barring some news that we want to talk about, because that's the other thing. We use the Patreon to kind of react to news as it happens, too, throughout the season. But I think we're going to do our first inaugural Team MVP draft.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give too many more details, although people can probably do the math on what it's going to be. But I think we have a fun idea for a kind of season preview-y type of episode that we can do every year. So we're going to do the first one either Monday or Wednesday of next week on the Patreon side. So before we get to some news and notes from Twins camp, and I wanted to talk about their pitching staff too a little bit today, but let's talk about our first sponsor, which is Blackstack, which is our presenting sponsor for the whole show.
That's right. I've had I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 people reach out to me in the last week or two saying, hey, thanks for talking about Blackstack because I tried one of their beer and this is my new summer beer and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's why we talk about Blackstack, because they are really good at the beer part. And that's why they have also, brought on a new distributor, which allows them to offer that beer to your local liquor store. So you don't have to go to their tap room at 94 and 280. But if you do want to go to their tap room, I would encourage you to check out Twins Daily social media or Twins Daily the site next week, because we're going to be having an opening day party at Blackstack. You can try Blackstack beer free. You're going to be able to try one free beer just for showing up to root on the Twins for opening day. So keep your ears and eyes open for that. They've got great stuff, including their local 755 New England IPA. They're known for their IPAs, and I'm surprised we didn't get into that with Phil, actually, when we talked about that, because I know that's one of his favorite places for IPAs. They've also got the French Slopes Pilsner and lots of other great varieties, both at the tap room and at your local liquor store. So just go to your local liquor store and check them out.
Okay, so let's talk a little pitching, because I feel like we always talk about the bench spots and the lineup and all that, which we've already done a little bit of. But so Zebby Matthews a week ago was a little bit of a question mark, because it appeared as though he tweaked his hip making a defensive play on a squibber down the third baseline. He went to field it and turned to throw to first, and his plant foot kind of slipped on the grass, and he left the game. And there was a lot of worry because he had looked great in camp. Not only did he avoid any sort of significant injury, he returned to the mound and had probably his best performance of spring training, and that's saying something, because he hasn't had a bad performance all
Right.
spring. I just looked up the overall numbers for him. He's thrown 9 1/3 innings so far. He has a 0 ERA. He's allowed 4 hits in those 9 1/3 innings, and he has 12 strikeouts with 1 walk.
Right.
And the velocity is fantastic, even in the context of the gains he made last year while doing his speed run from single A to the majors. You know, we saw in September for the Twins, while he was struggling overall, he was pretty consistently throwing 94, 95, sometimes 96 with the fastball. But what we've seen in camp through 9 1/3 innings so far is he's like 96, 97, 97 and a half.
Yeah.
And the other pitches, that's, on the 4-seam fastball, which is always going to be your hardest pitch. But his cutter now, there was a funny quote. I'm guessing you were sitting a foot from Baldelli when he said it, where Baldelli was like, yeah, I think he threw like a 94-mile-an-hour cutter, which I didn't even know he did.
Right, yes.
I was like, yeah, that's good. And there's also been some signs of just his overall pitch mix in terms of non-fastballs looking to improve, not only for raw stuff and velocity, which, he didn't stop with the first couple of years of velocity gains working with Twins coaches. He appears to be still tacking on a 0.5 mile an hour, 1 mile an hour, which is great to see. And he's just been so impressive. And the thing I feel like, for the last 6 months talking about Zebby Matthews a lot is he had that big breakout year, and he essentially went from an 8th round pick who threw, 92 miles an hour to now a top prospect who throws 95 or now 97 miles an hour. That's huge, but it's rare. It's not, they've done similar things with David Festa. They've done similar things with some other prospects. That's the ability to add velocity has really become a calling card of the Twins pitching development. But the real thing to me that makes Matthews stand out, I'm trying not to call him Zebby every single time. It's so
Yes.
It's so easy to just call him Zebby
It's
over and
such
over.
a good name.
Well, we run into the same thing with Baldelli.
Right.
Like, it's so easy to call him Rocco, but
Right.
it's like, why are we calling him anyway? Is that Matthews has increased this velocity and not only maintained but continued to build on it to the point that he's like working at 96, 97 rather than even topping out at that. but he's maintained this pinpoint sort of Brad Radke or
Right.
Nick Blackburn or what Carlos Silva-esque strike throwing ability, like control.
Well, and he's got this array of pitches. Like he kind of came up as he was sort of your prototypical. Okay, he's going to be sort of a soft thrower. We'll see what maybe a good, but good control. So somebody that you could probably maybe project to making the back end of a rotation, etc. And instead, what has ended up happening is he maintained all of that stuff, gained five miles per hour on his pitches, on his fastball, but also additional velocity on some of his other pitches. And yeah, he's been sort of the talk of the camp. I think the last time the last free episode we did was Friday, and I think we got all the injury updates Saturday morning. So I think
Right.
the last time we talked about him, it was, we're not totally sure what happened to him, right? And we've gotten a lot of injury updates since then. But what we heard that morning was, yeah, he seems like he's okay. We're going to try and do some long toss and see what happens. So I actually did not hear that quote that you talked about from Baldelli live because I went to that game as a fan, and we're sitting out on the Green Monster. If you guys have been to Boston's minor league stadium here in Fort Myers, it's just a few miles down the road from the Twins one, but it's modeled after Fenway Park. So they've got a big green deck in left field, similar to the monster in at Fenway, and we're at the very top of that. You can sit at the top of that. Let's sit on top, and we're looking at the back of it, and we're like, "There's two guys, just two Twins players in uniform playing catch on the back field. I mean, what is that?" And we're watching. It's like, that's Zebby Matthews, and sure enough, it was him warming up, doing some long toss before he got to the bullpen and took over innings 4 through 7 in that.
Yeah, he
particular
sort of
game.
made a
6.
start, like a piggyback start.
The piggyback start, yeah, because we had Ober was the first one. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
No, it was Joe Ryan. It was Joe Ryan was the first 3 innings, and then Zebby came in for that after that.
Yeah, and I mean, what we're seeing with a lot of the usage, where we are seeing 2 starters used in the same game, one pitches the first 3, one,
Right.
like you said, pitches 4 through 6. Part of that is, sometimes you want to use guys in specific spots, or you don't necessarily want to send certain guys on road trips if they're long on a bus ride and all that. But it really just speaks to how many competent major league
Right.
starters the Twins have. And Matthews' ascension and continued improvement by the looks of his spring plays a big part in that. I mentioned Festa, but if you look at their projected rotation, it's really good. I mean, it's got Lopez, Ryan, Ober as the top 3, which I think is one of the better top 3s theoretically on paper that the Twins have had in a very, very long time. And, I guess it's sort of similar to when they had Lopez, Sonny Gray, and Ryan prior
Right.
to Ober fully kind of emerging at that point. The 4th spot appears to be Chris Paddock's. The 5th spot seemingly is more of an open competition, but maybe tell me if I'm wrong on this. I still think probably Simeon Woods Richardson is the favorite.
I don't even know that it's really an open competition. I think it's a
Okay.
closed competition, but is it impossible that Woods Richardson would begin this season at St. Paul? Probably not, but I think it's really unlikely. And in fact, you're kind of seeing that Woods Richardson's getting starts, and Matthews and Festa are getting piggybacks.
Right.
Right. And including tonight, by the way. We've got a split squad game tonight. Festa is actually getting a start, but he's the one going on the road. Paddock is the one starting at home. So and we're not going to see piggyback, like you said, because we're kind of getting a little bit later into spring training and starting pitchers end up getting stretched out a little bit more. We're probably not going to see too many piggybacks from here on in.
But I mean, they have 7, 8. Andrew Morris, who
Right,
was
yeah.
in the last round of cuts, has also, similar to last season, where if Zebby Matthews didn't have maybe the biggest breakout of any pitching prospect in the high minors last year, not just the Twins,
Yeah,
but
right.
just, everywhere. He emerged from a kind of marginal prospect to a legit top 100 prospect and then pitched in the majors. If you take that out of the mix, people would be swooning over the season that Andrew Morris had, rising from single A to triple A. It's just in comparison to Matthews, it was a step below that. It's similar this spring. If Zebby Matthews weren't doing all the things that we just talked about to be sort of the standout guy in camp so far from a pitching standpoint, Morris would have gotten a lot more attention because he made 3 or 4 either starts or multi-inning relief appearances, piggyback starts, like you said, and he has been fantastic. And he's a guy who I ranked him as their fifth best prospect. He's maybe less of an upside type of starter than Festa or Matthews, more of a dependable kind of mid-rotation, third or fourth starter type. But I don't know that I'd want to lock that in as his ceiling either, because he's another guy who's added velocity, added to what is a very deep pitch mix. That's more his game, is like a
Yes.
varied pitch mix, off-speed stuff, good fastball, gets ground balls with a sinker, all that stuff. And he's another guy who has raised his raw stuff while also pounding the strike zone.
And while you say he's your fifth prospect, we should just mention, Matthews is no longer can be considered a prospect. Festa can no longer be considered a prospect. Yes, they're going to be beginning the season in St. Paul likely. Yes, they have a lot of upside, but because they already pitched so much in the majors last year, neither of them can qualify as a prospect anymore.
Well, Festa, yes. I don't abide by the. I'm a rebel. I'm a
not.
rebel, as you know. I'm a
Okay.
bad boy. I always joke with Becky that she loves a bad boy, and she got one. And so Zebby is technically not a prospect. You're correct. He's exhausted his Rookie of the Year eligibility,
Right.
but that's based on service time, which I hate that that's a Rookie of the Year thing. I only go by 50 innings and 100 or 130 at bats in the majors, which is the playing time component of rookie eligibility. And so, yeah, he had 37 innings, I think. So I consider him a prospect. But yes, your point is a good one. I say this, about other guys too in past years, but there are definitely teams for whom Andrew Morris would be the best pitching prospect. And there are definitely teams for whom Andrew Morris would be, more in the mix, not for an opening day job, but as sort of the next in line AAA guy. It just so happens that the Twins also have Festa and also have Zebby Matthews and also have some other pitching prospects not far behind all those guys. And so you look at the overall depth and, getting back to Paddock and Simeon Woods Richardson, I'm of the belief that based on last season, Simeon Woods Richardson should have been or should be sort of number 4, not number 5. It's semantic during the season. Like the slot in the rotation literally doesn't matter once the schedule's going and off days are happening and all that. I think a pretty clear sign that the Twins are, weighing Paddock's veteranness more so than performance last season, because Paddock not only was not as good as Simeon Woods Richardson last season, but threw like half as many innings as Simeon Woods Richardson for them and didn't pitch at all in the second half because of arm problems. But, it's easier to say Simeon Woods Richardson is still fighting for a job after one season in the majors at age, 24, basically, than it is to say Paddock is fighting for a job with an $8 million salary in his 6th season in the majors and all that. But I do think that will be relevant, not necessarily for opening day, but at some point here, if Festa, let's assume the opening day rotation is in some order: Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Paddock, Simeon Woods Richardson, which I think is likely.
Yes.
At some point, if you send Festa and Matthews to AAA, probably to be in the rotation with Andrew Morris, at least one or two or possibly all three of those guys are just gonna destroy AAA.
Right.
And so then it becomes a question of, when does the need arise? Because we know the Twins are not going to get through a full season with 5 starters. They probably won't get through a full season with 6, 7, 8 starters. And so it's a question of, not even from a performance standpoint, but from a health standpoint, maybe by the end of April, somebody needs some time off. Typically that's something that's happened with Twin starters, in which case, who's the first man up? Is it Festa? Is it Zebby? Is it whoever? But let's say, and this would be good, everyone stays healthy. Then I think there could be a scenario where it's like, okay, let's say it's mid-May. We don't need to see Festa destroy AAA anymore. We don't need to see Zebby put any more, video game type strikeout to walk ratios up in St. Paul. But then it becomes a question of, well, if a spot doesn't open up because of injury, do we have to create a spot based on performance or based on long-term outlook of who are we going to build this rotation around, and that could be a little bit dicey. I mean, for the same reasons.
I mean, this is what we're asked these questions all the time. Like, well, when somebody comes off the IL, who are they going to bump off of it in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
And we're like, well, I think we took a look at this last year. We said the 5 guys who were on the opening day rotation, right, which was, Pablo, Ober, Ryan, Varland, and Paddock. Right.
Yes. And
Those
by the way,
guys,
Varland wasn't supposed to be in the
right. Yeah.
rotation.
I'm not even counting DeSclafani here, like, because he was supposed to be in there, right? But those 5 that actually made it on the opening day rotation made 110 starts last year, which left 52 starts.
Yeah.
To go for somebody else, and I don't think that's an outrageously high number most years. I think if we go through that, I'd like to kind of go through that and see. But I bet you there are consistently a pitcher and a half's worth of starts that end up going to somebody else from whoever's on that opening day rotation. And we'll by the middle of May, if we'd love, that'd be a problem the Twins would love to have.
Yes, I mean, it is the definition of a great problem to have. Like,
right.
it is, if you're in May and you're having to debate internally, what are we going to do with our 7 great starting pitchers? Like, yeah, okay. I mean, what? Yeah,
right.
Maybe you ask Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny too to weigh in on that situation.
Right,
but it does speak to, as you look at this overall roster, and I don't just mean the opening day roster, but the 30, let's say 5 guys who are probably going to play a role on this team this year for sure. The 26 opening day, and then the handful of hitters and the handful of pitchers who are kind of next in line at AAA. That the bullpen projects to be number 1, which we've talked about. I actually wrote about it yesterday. By Fangraphs, projects the Twins to have the best bullpen in baseball this season, and I think there are some reasons to be optimistic and to believe that. I think there are a few pretty prominent reasons to be skeptical of that, but I do think it's a good bullpen. I mean, just bigger picture.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I've kind of come around to the idea of the rotation. If I had to bet, I would bet on the rotation being better than the bullpen. And it's, this is another possibly great problem to have, which is they're both good. But right. I think this rotation, not only in terms of, it kind of reminds me of 2 years ago when they had Bailey Ober as the next man up at AAA. As the 6th starter, which he didn't love, but it worked out really well for them because very quickly they needed him. And they ended up, I think, probably having a top 3 rotation in all of baseball with, during Lopez's breakthrough season and Ober making big strides and Sonny Gray, obviously. This kind of reminds me of that in that their front 3 is established and has upside. I mean, there's a very good chance that all 3 of Lopez, Ryan, and Ober are, let's say one of the top 20 starters in the American League. I think there's a very good chance of that,
sure.
Which means they're all kind of number 2 or better starters in that regard.
They're all playoff caliber guys.
Right. That's kind of how I view it. Like,
which is one of the questions we had this time last year, right? One of the things we were kind of tracking, and we were tracking this in part because they were coming off some, playoff appearances and had some wins and stuff, and we thought they had a really good shot at making the postseason last year, which didn't happen. But one of the things we were tracking throughout the year was, is somebody going to join Pablo as sort of a playoff caliber starter in that rotation? And I think Ober absolutely did. Ryan looked like it for the first half of the year until he got hurt. And, now it's a matter of getting those guys through September healthy,
right,
and effective. So,
and, I think I'm pretty skeptical about Paddock at this point just because of the injuries and the lack of.
Sure.
I mean, he really hasn't been healthy and effective since his rookie year, which was like 5 years ago. But
although he's had a decent spring, and we should just say he's showing decent velocity. And
yeah, I don't think it matters, but we'll see. I'd love to be wrong. I have no faith in it. It's not. I don't question his ability to get the velocity going, and I don't even question his ability to have a good start. Every 2 or 3 times. I mean, we saw that last year. He had some really good starts. He had some really good velocity. But I have no faith, and I would say this is justified based on his track record, but I have no faith in his arm just being able to kind of maintain that on a consistent basis. And I'd love to be wrong, and he's a year further removed from what is his second Tommy John surgery. But he's the guy in the rotation that I have the least faith in.
Sure.
And I'm not, I mean, we like Simeon because he was a great guest at the meltdown, and also he saved the Twins' ass last year, stepping
Right.
into that rotation. I mean, he was fantastic for the role that he was filling and the expectations, being pretty low. But I don't think he has the long-term upside that Festa and Matthews, maybe even Morris, although they're a little bit closer in my mind in terms of upside. And so I look at the top three, and I think it could be among the best in the league. And I look at the 4-5 of Paddock and Simeon Woods Richardson. And while I don't have a ton of faith in their upside or their, with Paddock, durability season long, those are certainly a quality 4-5 in a rotation. I mean,
Sure.
teams would kill to have that as their 4-5. I mean, there are teams in not so distant Twins history that would kill for that as the 4-5. But it is a kind of an interesting spot where it's like, I don't know that their 4-5 are even one of their 6 best because
Right.
of the guy that they're
Yeah.
going to have stashed at AAA. So there are, the inner workings of that. There's going to be some debate and some argument if injuries don't kind of make those decisions for them at some point early in the season. But and those are going to be tough questions that the Twins have to answer, and they're going to maybe have to make some tough calls that not everyone is happy with. But bigger picture, for the good of the team, you want as many good starting pitchers as you can get. Like, you want
Right.
50 of them. Like, if it means having to bump somebody and them not being happy with it, okay, you cross that bridge when you get there. But I mean, I would much prefer that as opposed to, well, they have the 5 guys, and then I hope those guys stay healthy because 6, 7, 8, 9 are not real impressive. I think the Twins are in the opposite situation. So I just look at the rotation depth that they have and the quality that they have at the top, and also the upside that they potentially have in Matthews and Festa if they end up getting an extended look in the rotation. I just think this might be kind of overlooked a little bit as this could determine the whole season for them.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
similar
Yeah.
in a way. It's similar to how it did 2 years ago. So yeah. Before we get to some other stuff, let's talk about our next.
It's
batch of
baseball
sponsors.
season is coming up here, and that means it's fantasy baseball season. And if you listen to this podcast, odds are you like getting into the minutia of of baseball. There's no better place to get the minutia of baseball if you are into fantasy baseball than RotoWire. We have been customers of RotoWire longer than RotoWire has been a sponsor for Gleeman and the Geek, but they have been a sponsor for Gleeman and the Geek, I think going on 10 years, something like that. And it's because they bring so much to the table. They have all the history of all the players that you'd ever want. You can totally track their development. And that's not even counting the stuff that's just information. Like that's just fun to be able to see that stuff. But on top of that, they have some major technical stuff that they have been adding to their site that makes it a no-brainer to join RotoWire. The latest one is you can sync your league, right? And they've got a draft assistant in there. So when you sync your league to RotoWire, their draft assistant will give you real-time advice you need to build a championship team based on your league's unique settings and RotoWire's expert projections. But they've also got the draft sheet stuff and
A totally free trial for Gleeman and the Geek listeners. And I always make this point. Here's how you know it's free. They're not even asking for like your credit card to, we'll bill you later. Right. It's totally free. You can try it out for 2 days. And if you want to schedule those 2 days as, do 10 drafts in those 2 days, go for it, because they're so confident that once you give RotoWire a try, you're going to realize the value and you're going to stick around as a long-term customer, which both John and I have done. So here's how you try it out. No credit card required to get the totally free trial. You just go to rotowire.com/Gleeman. That's ROTOWIRE, rotowire.com/Gleeman. Get all the draft prep that you could ever want, and then stick with them through the season and help make trades and waiver wire moves and line up stuff. They're great. rotowire.com/Gleeman.
Speaking of longtime sponsors, Harry's Razors was one of our original sponsors. If you haven't tried Harry's Razors yet, I mean, I think it could. I think you're safe in trying it now at this point. Like you don't have to be an early adopter. I understand. Maybe you were kind of hesitant. Like, oh, why would I ever go away from my? Well, because you'd go away from your old razor because the razors are half the price. They get directly delivered to you. Nice packaging. Still got the 5 blades. Basically around 2005, razor companies just kind of quit trying to add blades because they're how many more can you add? And instead, what Harry's did is disrupted the entire industry by saying, also they're easy to ship and cheap, and why do we making them put them behind glass at the local CVS? It's a pain in the butt to go get those razors. Now I've got a razor whenever I need it, so I've got a very smooth shave all the time from Harry's razors.
Yes, and you can try them out. They have a trial set. And here's what you get in the trial set. You get the 5-blade razor that you were just talking about, has a weighted handle. They also give you a foaming shave gel and then a very fancy travel cover. And that has a $13 value, but you can get it to give Harry's a try. Get the trial set for just $3. All you have to do is go to harrys.com/Gleeman. That's our exclusive link, HARRYS, harrys.com/Gleeman to get the $3 trial set and give Harry's a try. Okay. Let's see. So on the bullpen front real quickly, Brock Stewart's made a couple more appearances since we last spoke on the free show.
By the way, when you were using whose name? Oh, when you're talking about Zebby Matthews, right? Brock Stewart is also one of those names that we every time, not only when we talk about him, but I notice when my writers write about him, they always want to say his entire name. Nobody wants to refer to him as Stewart.
Isn't it funny? Like we've talked about that before. Like no one in my life calls me Aaron, and never has. Like
right.
like when I was 5, nobody called. Everyone called me Gleeman, and you're similar. Like you're Bona. And so I guess those are not last names like Smith or Jones. So I kind of get why people just say the last name. But you're right. There are some people, and I get fascinated by dumb stuff like this. But there are some people like us who everyone always instinctively or instinctually calls them their last name. But then there are some people, and it's not necessarily an uncommon first name, but people get called their first name always.
Right.
Like Betsy, let's say. Betsy Helfand.
Right.
I've never heard anybody call her Helfand.
Right. Yeah,
She's always just Betsy. Meanwhile, Helfand is not a common name. It's no different than Gleeman or Bonus or whatever like that. And
Brooksley is another one.
Yes. And then the other thing is what you just said.
You have to say both. You can't say just Lee.
There are some names that just sound good in full, said fully. Brooks Lee, Brock Stewart, Joe Ryan. And maybe those are shorter. I don't know. I would have to think about it a little, fewer syllables, or it flows a little better, or something like that. But yeah, I'm oddly fascinated by that. And there are guys like
Ty France.
Yeah, Ty France. I mean, maybe it is just if you have a short first or last name, people just kind of combine it. But Brock Stewart doesn't really fit that. But yes, I always call him Brock Stewart. I don't say Brock, and I certainly don't just call him Stewart. And so yeah, I'm very
Austin Martin.
Yeah, Austin Martin.
Nobody calls him. I mean, what I've noticed is because I was editing Twins Daily last week, and I'm like, why do we every other person we just refer to you refer to them the full name first time out, and then you refer to them as their last name. And there are certain names where I have to go through and I go, why do we always use this guy's entire full name every time we refer to him again? So
yeah, normally I would say, well, okay, if you're looking, a lot of these Joe Ryan, Brock Stewart, Austin, they're common last names and or short first names.
That's right.
Or there's an alliterative aspect to it, it flows. But here's the thing. We never call him Carlos Correa or Byron Buxton. And those two are both alliterative, flowing, good sounding names. We call them Correa and Buxton. So yeah, it's
Mickey
weird.
Gasper's heading into that realm as well. Nobody wants to call him Gasper. Everybody wants to call him. Well, what about Mickey Gasper?
I'm sure there's a linguistics professor or something listening to this who's like, "Oh, I can answer this easily. It's, part of the brain looks at." Anyway, Brock Stewart, B. Stewart, or no, let's call him Brock S. Returned to the mound maybe 10 days ago or something like that. Made his first spring appearance. after August shoulder surgery, and the immediate reaction was, oh wow, he's already throwing, 96,
Right.
97. From a stuff standpoint, that is great news. That means he didn't leave any of the velocity on the operating room table. Now there were some initial, like, he was walking some guys. He wasn't happy. It sounded like with strike throwing and some of the feel for his secondary pitches, but that comes with just shaking the rust off, I think,
Right.
was the hope. And I would say that in the like 2 or 3 appearances he made since then, the velocity is still there. He's still 96, 97. And the most recent outing, which was what, yesterday, I guess,
Wednesday
that
night. Yeah.
was the closest he's been to, like, oh, there's the Brock Stewart we remember from when he's been healthy the past 2 years, where the stuff is, high octane, but also he can command multiple off speed pitches beyond just trying to blow people away with the fastball. So there's still, some hurdles to clear, and you got to keep him healthy now for the next 2 weeks. But I would say the progress he's made, given that he got kind of a late start to camp because he was still finishing the rehab from surgery, I don't think there isn't much room to be more encouraged by what we've seen from him so far, from both a stuff standpoint immediately, but then like the, kind of smoothing out some of the rough edges or shaking off some of the rust. I think they have to be super encouraged by what they've seen
The
from him.
injury update that we got last Saturday morning from Nick Paparesto, like one of the things that he mentioned, which I didn't even really think about, but definitely should have been thinking about and got to remember to start asking about this was, yeah, we saw Stewart out there. He had showed good velocity. Everything was going. The important news was next day recovery seemed fine. His recovery from from going out there and unloading for 15 pitches, the next day there were no weird side effects or anything like that, and so that was and the question was just sort of asked, like, is he just now on a normal reliever program now? Like, I think the question was sort of like do you not have to? Is he no longer under your supervision, as the trainer? And the answer was no. I'm still checking on him pretty much every other day, but yes, he's just on a normal reliever workload right now, normal reliever process, and so yeah, he looks like he is going to be. They're not saying, oh, he's ready to go for opening day, but all the indications are that he should be ready to play that role, to play a role in the bullpen on opening day.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at Stewart, because of his Brock Stewart, that is, not Shannon Stewart. Maybe that's why we say Brock
Maybe
Stewart.
that's it.
It's been a
Right.
previous Stewart.
Right.
The Not Kristen Stewart, not Shannon Stewart, not Rod Stewart,
Not
That's all
Stuart
I
Little.
Stuart Little, yeah, not Randball Stewart,
Not Stewie.
yeah, Stewie from the Family Guy. Yeah, I like this. This is really
All,
dumb
all of
game.
those guys will be ready for opening day, though.
Yeah, we think. I don't
Randall
want to really.
Stew, absolutely ready for opening day.
Yeah, I'm gonna see him. I'm going to a wedding with him, I think, in a couple weeks. That'll be good. There's 2 guys who need to be in suits.
Yeah.
Me and Ramball Stu.
And need haircuts, man.
Well, yeah. Well, he's got the good long hair, I think. He's got the silver fox
Yeah.
growing it out. I got this guy should just shave his head. Anyway, the point I was going to make about Brock Stewart was, it is important, like you said, to get a sense of how he's feeling the day after he pitches. And for some pitchers, it's important because you're going to end up using them during the season on back-to-back days, semi-regularly. I don't think that's really where the importance of that comes with Stewart. I think the importance of that with Stewart is from a physical standpoint. Like, how are you
Right.
recovering
Right.
24 hours later or sometimes 12 hours later? Because, they've shown with him, he's had a very lengthy injury history going back to his days as a Dodgers starter prospect. And as good as he's been for the Twins, he's also only thrown 40-something innings in 2 seasons. He only threw like 15, 16 innings last season. So they're at a point with him, and this is where having a good deep bullpen has an added benefit. You don't need to push him. You certainly don't need to push him early in the season. Like, I will be shocked, barring, some 19-inning game or something that they play where it's just all hands on deck. I will be shocked if we see Brock Stewart pitch back-to-back days at any point in the first month, certainly, maybe first half.
Maybe,
And
yeah.
so it's not a matter of how is he the next day because we want to be able to use him because that is kind of the last box to check for relievers because as we've talked about, relievers have a much different situation in camp because they're not really building up from a in-game durability standpoint where a starting pitcher, they need to go from 2 innings to 3 innings to 4 innings to 5 innings kind of gradually. With a reliever, most of these guys are 1 inning guys, maybe 2 inning guys at most, but where they're trying to build up a lot of the time is late in camp, they'll get used back to back as sort of a final test for the season because the truth is Baldelli would love to avoid using all relievers back to back, but the modern game,
Right.
even with an 8-man bullpen, the lack of innings being eaten by starters across the league, and the Twins are average in that regard for the most part at this point. It just necessitates having to use guys back to back. And the other thing is, it's not just from an innings eating standpoint. If you have a late lead in 3 straight games, you're going to end up using Duran and Jax, et cetera, back to back at some point, maybe 3 times at some point. And so that's usually the last box that teams want to check for a reliever at the end of spring training. Use them back to back, see how they feel.
Yep.
With Stewart, I guess I would just be shocked if they did that because,
That's a good point.
It would be great to have him available and at full strength back to back throughout the season. I mean, that would make the bullpen even stronger. But to me, it's like I want to avoid using him. Period. If you can, like
right. Yeah,
if it's a 6-2 game in the 7th inning, I would much rather go to, Jorge Alcala or Louis Varlin or something like that. Even if it gives you a slightly less opportunity to be convinced you're going to hold that lead just because I want to save bullets with Brock Stewart. And so using him back to back, I would think I would be kind of shocked. But I mean, that he is, to me, and I talked about how the bullpen projects the best, and I think the rotation's probably better. He might be the kind of pivot point of, is this a good bullpen or is this a great bullpen? Because if you have him healthy for like even 40 or 50 innings, then it can definitely be a great bullpen because then you have not just 3 guys you trust, you got 4 guys you trust in high leverage, and you might, with Varlin and Alcala and some other guys maybe emerging, you might get to a point where you have 4 or 5 guys you trust.
Right.
And that's
you've got basically 3, hopefully, elite guys, right? He's not just a guy you trust. He's a guy that, he was an elite reliever when he was healthy and when he was throwing out there. He was Jack's level. He was Duran level. He was, and there's Stewart. Like those 3 are about as good of a trio as you're going to want to face in the late innings. And then, you've also got potentially, Varland, who we haven't really talked about yet, trying to maybe work his way, certainly with the ability to work his way up to there. Alcala, who, has, I think, looked pretty good this spring, certainly seems to have the velocity, seems to be more his first half self than his second half self. Sands, which, was one of those 3 guys that you really depended on last year and really had probably a better year than you remember. He ended up giving up a few more runs and a few more hits than probably should have, just had some bad luck, as well as got past some,
he also
physical injuries.
The last week of the season, because they were like clinging to their playoff spot and they had some other injuries, he pitched through, I think it was either back soreness or hamstring or something like that. And he gave up like 4 runs where it was like, everyone knows he's not 100%, but it wasn't a long-term injury.
So I just listed 3 guys who are, legitimate 9th inning type arms, and then 3 more guys that you could take a look. Like these are all, good 7th inning arms at the very least. And then you're talking about a bullpen that is effective and deep and, hopefully somewhat resistant to the various injuries and ups and downs that can happen to a bullpen throughout a 6-month season. So
and if things go well, this absolutely can be the best bullpen in the league. But like I wrote about yesterday, I listed a few reasons for skepticism. One of them being Brock Stewart's injury history.
Sure.
One of them being the stuff with Duran that we've talked about since last season, where he just hasn't been as dominant. And there's some other things too. There's also, and this is the other bullpen note that we'll finish up this part on, which is they've already had some bullpen injuries in camp. And that's the thing with, multiple relievers are going to go down during the season. It's just a question of when and who and for how long. Topa had shoulder discomfort last week, and Michael Tonkin also had shoulder strain last week. It sounds like Topa, who we were immediately like very worried about because he only pitched 3 times last year with a knee problem in spring training, and then he had some shoulder problems while he was coming back from the knee problem. And so he was like, "Oh, here we go again." Like they chose to bring him back for I think 1.2 million, and now he's already got shoulder problems in camp. I'm not saying he's out of the woods with that, certainly, but it seems like a fairly minor thing to the point that I don't even think they sent him for an MRI, and he's already throwing again on the side. So I guess I would expect him to pitch, if not this weekend, then certainly next week, to kind of try to resume his normal pace so that he might be an option for opening day. I'm a little skeptical on that. But whereas with Tonkin, he's been shut down for at least a few weeks here with a more significant shoulder strain. So he has no chance of being on the opening day roster, which then in turn creates an opening. And I think it's just going to be Varlin, honestly,
Right.
filling that.
I think it feels like that.
I mean, that's what I would do. I think the usage of Varlin has kind of lifted the veil on the idea that he's just a reliever now, even though they won't say that. He did pitch 2 innings last time, but he's been used as a reliever, I think, in all 5 or 6 appearances this spring. He's looked good. The results have been good. The velocity's been good. I am optimistic overall about what Louis Varlin can be as a reliever, but even more than that, I'm just very curious to see. I just want him to get, hopefully it's on opening day, but to get like kind of a full runway to try to be a full-time, 1 inning, occasional 2 inning, max effort reliever and just see what he's capable of, because I think his struggles as a starter, or initially his lack of consistency as a starter, and then last year the struggles as a starter that got him bumped after April. I just worry that it's soured people on like just the talent he has in that arm alone. And I just would point to so many examples of Twins history recent. I mean, look at Jax, look at Sands, look at Stewart for that matter, where a guy wasn't a good starter.
Right.
And sometimes they couldn't stay healthy. Sometimes they just like Griffin Jax just didn't have the raw stuff as a starter. And then you fast forward like a year or two and as a reliever, and they don't even look the same. I mean, look back to like Liam Hendricks when he was with the Twins. I always caution, don't confuse what a guy looks like as a starter with what he could possibly look like as a reliever.
I'm not soured on it at all based on that. Like, just take a look at his numbers as a reliever in 2023. He had 17 strikeouts and 1 walk in 12 innings. Like,
yeah,
by after the Twins were eliminated in the postseason, there was, postseason talks with the, sort of a unpacking of the year with the beat reporters. And I will tell you, they were so excited about what they had seen from Varlin as a reliever that I think they've been waiting for this. They've been kind of, at least members of the Twins organization have been waiting for the chance to be able to see what he can do out of the bullpen. And so I'm optimistic.
I agree. And similar to the, when we were just talking about the rotation and kind of saying, well, it's not clear to me that they're going to take their 5 best, or at least their 5 highest upside guys, because I think they're going to send Festa and Matthews to AAA. And I don't have a huge problem with that, obviously. But I think that if Tonkin hadn't gotten injured, and if somehow all 8 of the planned relievers had made it through spring training healthy and looking pretty good, you might have gotten into that situation with Varlin where it's like, well, we got 7 guys with guaranteed contracts, and we have Cole Sands, who is not, in danger of losing a job. That's your 8-man bullpen, no matter how good Varlin looks in spring training. Maybe you send him to AAA, and I think that would have been unfortunate in that regard. And so I think the Tonkin injury, while you don't root for an injury, obviously, and Tonkin can be a useful player for them, I think it does open the door, and it does take away from depth, losing him right away, but it does open the door for Varlin, who has much more upside than Michael Tonkin. Varlin, similar to like Matthews and Fest on the pitching side, has the upside to be one of their better relievers. And so I at age 27, and he spent 3 parts of 3 years at AAA, mostly starting, obviously. It's time for him to sink or swim, and I think he will swim. But more than that, I'm just curious what he's capable of once he transitions fully to the bullpen and doesn't have to worry about pacing himself, doesn't have to worry about making it through a lineup twice, can kind of pare down his pitch mix. I think people are possibly going to be pleasantly surprised by what Louis Varland reliever looks like compared to what Louis Varland starter looks like.
I think I think the multi-inning appearance appearance that he made actually is a good sign for that being sort of where their head is, because the multi-inning reliever coming into this camp was probably Tonkin, right? And so, if they're taking a look at, well, we may not have Tonkin ready, we got to have one or two potential arms at the back end of that bullpen who are going to be multiple inning relievers. And if you just take a look back to, say, 2023, when Duran was, looking like a potential, monster arm that in the future. But when he first started, right after opening day, he was being used in multi-inning role. Like, one of the things that
2022, you mean?
2022, yes. I'm sorry. One of the things that that Varland is going to have to make an adjustment for is, how do I prepare as a reliever? Like, what does my routine look like? How do I bounce back, from one day to the next, et cetera? What's the mentality that I use for, preparing for games, et cetera? All that stuff he's had a taste of it. He has had a taste of it in 2023. He had a taste of it in 2024. I'm sure he's got some thoughts on that. But there is just sort of the first month and a half that you're probably in the bullpen, they're looking for you to probably handle some low leverage stuff, no matter what your upside is, as you kind of get your feet underneath you as a reliever. And one of the ways you do that is handling the low leverage stuff like multiple inning outings. And I think it's a good sign that they want him. That feels to me like they're preparing to put him on the roster for opening day. So
yeah, I agree with that. And I think, while I would like to eventually see him just settle into, the same type of 90% of the time they're pitching one inning and one inning alone, I think that's where he'll eventually end up. I have no problem basically letting him go through a lineup once in a lower leverage like you're describing. I think
right, of course,
what he's gotten in trouble with as a starter isn't going more than one inning. It's going more than once, facing the same hitters twice in the same game has been problematic for him, because his pitch mix isn't as deep as a lot of starters, because his secondary stuff isn't as good.
Right.
And he gets in trouble because he leaves a pitch over the plate the second or third time he's facing someone, and they just hit it for a homer. And that's, it wrecks an otherwise good start. But for the most part, if you look at his starts, within the overall inconsistency and sort of mediocrity of a 5-something ERA as a starter, I think he's made 22 starts or something like that for the Twins over the last 3 years. The first trip through the lineup, which is usually the first 2 2.3 innings, something like that, has been really good. Good ERA, good, strikeout to walk ratio. And so that's kind of the mentality I think I would have with expectations for him if he does what you just described and kind of start out low man on the hierarchy. Sometimes that requires pitching 2 innings, but that's fine. It's still once through the lineup, so I still like that. The one last thing I wanted to talk about before we kick it to the Phil Miller clip that we wanted to end on was that his coworker at the Star Trib, Lavelle Neal, had an article yesterday or 2 days ago, kind of a column, but basically him emptying out his notebook on all the things he's talked to people about and learned about the ongoing sales situation for the team.
Okay.
And it didn't differ a ton from the stuff that Dan Hayes reported and came on the show to talk about a couple weeks ago once the Justin Ishbia news broke that Ishbia had backed out of talks with the Twins. Lavelle clearly followed up on that and talked to as many people about that. I think the big takeaway from Lavelle was that the timing has been completely changed on this. The timeline on this has been completely changed, which when they were getting far down the road with Ishbia and gaining confidence that he was the guy, there was optimism. Dan reported it, other people reported it, that we could get a deal in place here, before or around opening day. And then hopefully within a month or two after that, you can actually, cross the T's and dot the I's and get the sale process, hand over the keys to Target Field to someone before the All-Star break. Well, that's out the window now because they kind of had to, I don't want to say go back to square one, but they had to circle back and change their approach because Ishbia backed out of it. And so Lavelle's point that he made, and he had a bunch of other details. People should go read the whole article, but I think the date he put on it was he thinks it's going to be another 6 months, possibly, before the sale is actually completed, which maybe means you make a decision by June, let's say, or something late in the first half, and then you kind of use the end of the season to finalize that, which is disappointing. I realize fans are going to be disappointed to hear that because people just want the change to happen at this point as soon as possible. And I totally get that, and I agree. But, the other factor is if you don't get new ownership in place before the All-Star break, the trade deadline is going to then be handled under the Pohlads ownership,
right,
from an investment or an aggression standpoint. So that's disappointing. But what I will say is, as long as a new owner is in place by the end of the season and you can begin next offseason with a clean slate and a new mentality and whatever payroll changes happen, that I think is at least enough to be like, okay, then it wasn't enough to kind of swoop in and save this season or add to this season. But, the real, I don't want to say worst case, but the real disappointment would be if this thing drags on into, October, November, December, and you have to have another offseason of payroll limitations and payroll, working within the Pohlads system. So disappointing.
I mean, the goalposts have certainly moved there.
Yes.
What you have just said, like, whereas
Definitely.
we were previously thinking, well, the fact that they, the payroll went up slightly as opening day approached, and we thought, they had a little bit money to spend on a Harrison Bader or a Ty France or something like that. And we thought that might be an indication that they were close to selling this thing. And that might be an indication that come the trade deadline, they can, make a trade for a, veteran bat that might be a little bit overpriced. They won't have their hands tied quite the same way. This is to going to, well, at least we won't have a third off season in a row where we're,
right. But I think
payroll.
I think all that was true.
Right,
But it was based on Justin Ishbia.
Right, that's right.
And so once he backs out, and the Twins can say all they want that, now they've, Lavelle wrote about this. It's clear they're trying to downplay, how many eggs were in the Justin Ishbia basket, basically. And, maybe there's truth to that. But if your eggs were not in the Justin Ishbia basket, if you were not far down the road with Ishbia, if you were not internally pretty convinced that he was going to be the guy, then why, like you said, the sudden moving of goalposts and the sudden timeline change? Because then if Justin Ishbia wasn't the guy, then all you've removed from the equation is a guy, right? So I think this sort of reveals the details in the proof being in the pudding a little bit, which is like, they can say all they want, and they've tried to put this message out pretty consistently, which is we have multiple interested suitors. And I'm not even saying that's incorrect. All I'm saying is all you did was remove Justin Ishbia from the equation. Right. So why has it shifted from hopefully opening day to hopefully midseason to then, I extrapolate from that, hopefully before the offseason. But so I think that lays bare kind of that situation. But at least the messaging that they put forth to Lavelle and that Lavelle reported was they still are confident they can sell it. They still are confident they can get the price that they need to get. They still believe that they have multiple interested parties. But yeah, from a purely a fan standpoint, Justin Ishbia changed the whole situation, I think, whether they're going to say it or not. And that's unfortunate. But you can only play the cards that you have in front of you at this point. You can't talk about, hey, I had aces 6 hands ago. Like, who cares? You didn't win that pot. That pot got whatever happened to it. So this is not ideal. I want a change in ownership, regardless of who it is. I want it yesterday, if possible. And if it drags on through the trade deadline, that is going to probably hurt them at the trade deadline, just based on the Pohlad stance on this type of things. But bigger picture, if you get a new owner in place by the end of this season, I think that is still cause for celebration. Now, let's see a month from now what the goalposts, where they stand.
Right. Yeah.
And what are they still put
Big
forth
picture, if we've got a new owner by 2028.
correct. Or maybe we'll sell a minority stake and do it, transition in time. And I mean, believe me, I am the world's leading Pohlad skeptic on all fronts, and this hasn't changed that. So, okay, so let's now kick it.
Well, first we better do a couple sponsor ads.
Oh, yeah, you're right. So let's talk about our last couple sponsors here.
Yeah.
The first one is Factor Meals.
Yeah, and I will give you a life hack is having them deliver to you when you are getting back from a month at spring training. We fly in Tuesday morning, and Tuesday afternoon I've got Factor Meals showing up on my doorstep, which is going to be perfect because we don't have to run to the grocery store, don't have to figure out what our meal plan is, don't have to make anything for the next few days. I've also got Chrissy running away to Philadelphia for 5 days to go to like a high school reunion, and now I've got to be loaded with Factor Meals to take care of me, and that is good news because A, they're super convenient. B, they're super tasty, and C, they're even healthy. Like they're even, I think we're getting I think we're trying the keto, KTO, which I don't even really know what that is, but I know it's supposed to help me, maintain my weight, and I'm really looking for it. And every time I have a Factor meal, it's super tasty. So yeah, I'll sign up for that any day.
Yeah, and if you want, they have vegetarian stuff. They have meat-based stuff. Like you can sort of pick and choose the type of menu you want delivered. You can eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use the code factorpodcast to get 50% off your first box. Plus, they toss in free shipping. That's the code Factor, FACTOR, Factor Podcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. And then
also, if you don't want to be in Aaron's shoes, where he walks into a cost cutter's
great
place,
clips, John. How dare you?
Great clips, and is worried about what they might do to his hair because it may never come back. We might suggest you recommend or you check out Hims. Hims is just a convenient way for you to get quality access to a range of hair loss treatments. That all work, and it's from the comfort of your couch. You don't have to worry about. You're going to get doctor trusted options, clinically proven ingredients. The name brand stuff like finasteride and minoxidil and all the stuff that can grow. They're going to give you all your options, whether it's chewable or oral or spray or serum treatments to do things, and it's all 100% online, so there's no uncomfortable doctor visits. So we would you want to get past the hair situation you are dealing with. You want to try something. You want as few barriers to getting in your way as possible. Check out Hims.
You can start your free online visit today at hims.com/Gleeman. That's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Hims.com/Gleeman. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Okay. So now we're going to leave you with a nice little chunk of our episode with Phil Miller of the Star Tribune, who's been at spring training longer than everyone. He doesn't leave. And he shows up before everyone, and he leaves after everyone.
And then goes straight to St. Louis.
Yeah, he's a maniac is what he is.
Yep.
What you're going to hear now is it's going to start with Phil just telling a funny story from his way back in the day on the Twins beat.
I will set up that story quickly because it happened because the MLBPA every spring training the MLBPA visits each of the teams. Major League Baseball Players Association Union visits each of the team and has a morning with the players where they kind of bring them up to speed on all this players union stuff. And I think Phil got some time with the president of that and with some representatives of it. And one of them was Kevin Slowey. And that brought to mind a funny Kevin Slowey story that he had, which we all have our own Kevin Slowey story. That's basically Kevin Slowey is responsible for the Gleeman and the Geek podcast.
Well, don't ruin it. Yes, we have dueling Kevin Slowey stories.
That's right.
But then we also included a little bit of the discussion we had with Phil to get his thoughts on both the second base competition, which is the biggest competition, I would say, in camp, and also what that could mean for Mickey Gasper, who has seemingly started to gain a little bit of momentum as a possible bench player, utility player, that sort of thing. So what you're about to hear is dueling Kevin Slowey related stories, followed by a second base competition / bench spot / Mickey Gasper debate. No, not debate. Discussion.
Right.
With Phil.
Kevin Slowey works for the Players Association. He's in charge of player outreach. Pretty high position. He's been there for 10 years. It was seeing him and chatting with him in the clubhouse. It was he looks great, man. He looks like he could still step on the mound. And it just reminds me of how long ago that was. But and I don't know that I'd ever told him. He said I had not. But in 2009, I was the beat writer for the Pioneer Press, and we were on a road trip, a St. Louis, Kansas City road trip. And in the clubhouse on, it must have been May 30th, Slowey and Glenn Perkins came up to me in the clubhouse, and Perkins had this piece of paper that he was reading from, and it said, reporters above replacement numbers, it averages, the RAR. And Lavelle was like a 7.3, and they had made up all these numbers, and Kelsey was like 5.4 and really rising, and had all these numbers, and then it showed I was like minus 7.1, or I don't remember the numbers, although I do still have the piece of paper. And Slowey and Perkins, two of the smarter, more analytic oriented pitchers, come up to me and said, we got to let you go. It's just not working out. So that was May 30th. On May 31st, no, and I guess it was June 29th and June 30th. Yeah. On June 30th, the very next day, phone rings in my hotel room at the Kansas City Airport Marriott, and it is the editor of the paper, the Pioneer Press, calling to tell me that today is my last day at the Pioneer Press, that they are laying off, whatever it was, 14 or 15 guys, and that I should go to the airport, book a flight, and come home. It was the second day of the series, I think. Or maybe it was the first. Yeah, I think it was the second day. Anyway, so I never set foot in the clubhouse again that season.
After you were fired by Slowey.
A day after Kevin Slowey and Glenn Perkins tell me they're letting me go. Perkins and I have laughed about that a few times. A few years ago, I still have the paper somewhere, and I
was part of you like the first few seconds as this phone call was happening. Did part of you think, "Is this those fuckers messing with me?"
Like the editor, the editor in on it too.
I thought Kevin Slowey has so much power with that team. Yeah. No, I mean there had been rumors of potential layoffs at the Pioneer Press at the time, but and that was my third year, so I was still relatively new, and it went by seniority, and I was the last on the cutoff line. I was the last guy laid off. But anyway, it turned out to be the best thing for my career, because the Star Tribune called a couple months later and asked me to apply, and I've worked there ever since. And
now look at you. You're in a small room with John Bonus on a Monday morning. Everything.
Yeah, but he said I would have the opportunity to talk to the ghost of Aaron Gleeman,
that's right,
who we used to see in Fort Myers, but who is above it all now.
Yeah, I'm above it. That's how I would describe my lifestyle now. Above it.
I think you can blame this podcast in part on Kevin Slowey as well. Like the Gleeman of the Geek podcast started in part because we started arguing about Kevin Slowey in a parking lot one time, a blogger get together at Bloomington
Park Tavern, right?
Oh, yeah, Park Tavern. Yeah, yeah, Park Tavern. And it was entertaining enough that we talked afterwards and said we should maybe try doing a podcast.
Did you
I
start
bel-
arguing about the eighth guy in the bullpen?
No, it was just it was about
like,
Kevin
hey,
Slowey.
this would be a show.
Basically, I think if I
The fifth
remember,
guy in the rotation.
I may have turned this into something more interesting than it actually was. But yeah, we would, there was a dozen people there or whatever. Everybody was drinking beer. I don't know if we were watching a game or whatever, and we were discussing stuff. But then we were leaving and continuing to argue about this, and I believe I said something along the lines of, if we're going to have a discussion this stupid and this long, we should at least record it. Or at least, like that was the gist of how this started. Like, otherwise we're just doing this for no reason. You know
I
what
said,
mean?
I'll do it, but only if we do it at a bar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
now
I've
look at
said
us.
before, right? You guys used to do these at bars, but I was
They were
younger
always
then.
much more interesting,
Yeah.
apparently, to
But-
Phil Miller.
Anyway, Kevin Slowey had not heard that story. He did not. He only vaguely remembered it, but Perkins and I laughed about it a couple of times. But he was very amused by the power he apparently wielded there.
Well, here's a nice thing. I can say this now, however many years later, you've landed on your feet, other than this morning being on this show.
Still saw the llama.
It's true. Big day. It was a big day for
He'll
you.
always have the llama.
You no longer were accruing negative value below replacement level once they let you go. So you were at negative 0.7, you said.
Something like that. Yeah.
So that didn't build any further. You didn't get to like negative 1.5. I mean, that seems like that's where you were headed that season, just performance wise. So if they would have let you continue to play in the second half, you might have been in like Luis Rivas territory of like -1, -2. So this was a nice way to stop that. Do you think your editors were doing you a favor in terms of your baseball reference page?
Or maybe
making.
Or maybe the Twins. I was doing the Twins affair because surely that would have pulled them down. That was the year they tied with the Tigers and had to play the one-game playoff.
Yeah,
and
that game would have mattered.
Do they still make that playoff if they're carrying me for the last 3 months? I mean, who knows?
What you said at that time in 2009, is that what you said? Yeah.
Yep.
Lavelle was the top of the wins above replacement for reporters chart at 7-something. What are Lavelle's numbers since then look like? Would you say if you had to put a ballpark on that?
I don't.
Where does he rank as your favorite people?
I don't subscribe to Reporter Reference, so
Okay.
I don't know.
This is fun because now I just want to bring up topics that Phil's going to go.
The other thing I remember about that day, it was the last day of June because the second half, the fiscal year started the next day. Not only did I get laid off from my job that day, but I made my first mortgage payment on my house that same day.
God.
The very first one. That's
Yeah,
about.
it was.
But
We
you
just
still
moved in.
Are you still in that house?
I am.
Yeah. So there you go.
Thank you, Star Tribune.
All right, let's finish with a couple very quick little notes here. Just get Phil's thoughts on a couple small things here. But do you? So
Not
we've
with the
talked,
small things. Okay.
yeah, we got the big stuff like Randy Dobnak and Erasmo Ramirez. I was going to ask about Julian's defense. You described it. Although we should note he hit a homer too, right?
He did. He did. He hit a homer, and 2 batters later, so did Brooks Lee.
Yeah. Yeah,
Should
Brooks
keep track
Lee.
how that's going.
Is he,
Well, okay.
Is he competing with Lee or is he competing with Gasper at this point?
I mean, Brooks Lee was playing shortstop yesterday.
Well,
which,
I mean,
which
they don't have a lot of other people who can play shortstop of Correa, isn't there? Right?
yeah, I thought that was interesting that they tried playing Julian at a position that he has no experience at, and they were playing Brooks Lee at what he, I think, considers his best position. And I thought, I don't know if we're placing, if I'm reading too much into stuff, but it just feels like that's how that's going.
Well,
and Mickey Gasper is the wild card in this.
Okay. Well, this is going to be. I have like 3 things here on the position player side, and that's one of them. So, I mean, you mentioned the article you wrote, and we actually talked about this with Bobby a little bit. We like to talk about your articles with Bobby. That's what we did a lot on the episode. But the whole idea of like spring training stats don't matter and all this stuff. I mean, this is a data point in that regard, which is you got 2 guys in Julian and Gasper who can both theoretically play first base and second base. you've put the guy with the least experience at first base, and the guy with the least experience at second base, and you might say, well, isn't that hurting the pitcher on the mound? Isn't it hurting the team's chances of winning? But that's a pretty good example. If they don't, that's not the point of spring training. And so,
right. I was going to say that's
to,
what spring training is for. Yeah.
Right. But that's one of the reasons why at the end of spring training, you look at somebody's ERA or their batting average or whatever, and you go, yeah, okay, it's, I'd rather them do well than do poorly. But does it really matter if the team is like intentionally playing guys at their worst positions to try to expose them and get them more reps there and evaluate them there? I mean, that's a pretty good example. Brooks, like if they were trying to win a game, they'd have Brooks Lee at second base. They'd have, whatever. But, okay, I guess second base, what does the second base competition look like at this point? Like, would you even consider Julian part of the second base competition?
Oh, sure. Okay. I mean, that's his best position. So if he hits a homer a day the rest of the way, I would say he's going to be the second baseman. I mean, yeah, the spring training is for teaching them and seeing if they can handle it, and they know what his defense is at second base, for good or bad, and so I think he's still in the picture there. 2 weeks to go of get a lot more playing time as we come down the stretch. And Mickey Gasper has kind of, he's hitting in the 400s, and he's, you look at his numbers from minor leagues.
Right. He led all of AAA in OPS last year.
His OPS, his career OPS is over 400. It's
on base percentage,
or on base percentage, yeah. And he is quietly making a case, that when camp started, because you need as many catches as he had, that he was wearing catching gear. And I thought, well, that's okay. A good thing to have an emergency catcher like Kyle Farmer the last couple of years. They never used him, but every once in a while, Kyle Farmer would catch a bullpen. So that's helpful, but he's trying to make the team, and it's probably not going to be as a catcher. So he is out playing the field. He has looked good. He takes a lot of reps in the morning. He is on the half field behind the stadium all the time, taking reps. So he's trying hard. I did not see him as I figured he was spending the year at St. Paul waiting for injuries, but he's got a shot.
I mean, you mentioned that, like, great on base percentages every year, AA, AAA. Last year, great overall at AAA, 9-something OPS. But I mean, he's one of those guys. If he was 6'2", he'd already played 3 years in the majors, probably. But because he's 5'0", and he was a late round pick, and he was out of college, so he was already 23 when he started. He's been
he's from New Hampshire, so he wasn't playing year round, and
but he's been deemed kind of a quad A guy, and sometimes that's for good reason, but also there's been plenty of guys in Twins history and just every team's history where it's like, at some point, and I'm a big believer in this a lot of times with the relief pitchers, like Nishek, I remember having this conversation about way back in the day. I don't care what he throws or how he throws it. At some point, the AAA results are so overwhelmingly positive and dominant. And I would say that's the case with Gasper here too. When you're, hitting 300 with a 400 on base percentage and some decent power against AAA competition, I don't care how tall he is. I don't care what his background is. At some point, like, I'm pretty certain the guy can at least be a decent major league hitter. But the question with him and why they're playing him at second base is, where does he get at bats? Like, yeah, if they had the DH spot open for him or first base open for him, maybe, which could come into play with some injuries, like you said. But he's done a lot of catching in the minors, including at AAA. Like, half of his time was at catcher. But I don't think, even when they traded for him, asking around that day, people were like, "Oh no, he's not a catcher."
No, I mean, and so you talk to him now, he's strictly being thought of as an emergency catcher, right?
Right. But so, as a last guy on the bench, I like that bat a lot. But the bat for the last guy on the bench is a lot more, or a lot less useful in terms of just day-to-day utility.
Yeah, but you've also got sort of, I mean, this is kind of
who's he going to pinch hit for? No one. I mean, who? Who are you going to pinch hit Mickey Gasper, 29-year-old rookie, for in the late innings?
I mean, yeah,
Maybe a lefty.
He's a switch hitting bat, right?
But he's
So,
worse
yeah.
from the right side. I mean,
Yeah.
he's fine from the right side, but he's better from the left side. So,
Right.
but I mean, I guess the point I'm making is these reps he's taking at second base are probably fairly important to his life in terms of carving out a niche in the majors, because he's going to have to be able to play some position
Yeah.
passively with the Twins or elsewhere.
Yeah,
to
that's
be
where the
a-
opening is. So yeah, that's he doesn't have much choice. He fits. He looks a little like Super Mario making plays out there, but it's you're right. He doesn't really look the part, but he's willing to do anything to stick, and he does. He does take good at bats. He hits the ball hard.
If Lee wins the second base job, which I think is kind of the assumption that you have to go on if Gasper's going to make this team, but Lee's taking over second base, well, then Lee is also probably your backup shortstop, right? So if you've got Correa out, you've got Lee over there. Now that leaves, Castro could be playing second base, but that would be opening up a spot for Gasper as well. So
Right. I mean, I think it depends on Lee. I still think they would like Lee to win that job. And I think he's got a couple homers now in the last 3 or 4 days, whatever, that helps. I would like Lee to win that job also. I don't want to paint that as like a wrong opinion that they would like him to win the job. But I think if he wins the job, it puts a lot more pressure on Julian, not in terms of performance, but in terms of what we were just kind of talking about with Gasper. Is like, well, where are we actually going to use Julian if he's on the team?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, is he just your second baseman, your second DH, your first, like, or do we just send him to AAA and let him hit for a month or two and see what happens? And if that's the case, then yeah, there's a spot for Gasper. Potentially now Austin Martin's in that mix too. But yeah, that's interesting. I think second base has what we've kind of spotlighted throughout as the only real competition of note. And I think that's still the case. But depending on how that competition goes, the last bench spot could be in play too. I don't know.
Yep.
Gasper's intriguing in that role.
Yeah, you're right.
And that was Phil Miller on the Patreon side, patreon.com/Gleeman. We've had several great guests on while we've been here at spring training. We've been doing 2 episodes a week, Mondays and Wednesdays here. 3 weeks ago, that one of those special guests was Dan Hayes, literally the morning right after he broke the news that the Ishbia has dropped out. I think that's one of my favorite episodes we've ever done on the Patreon, because nobody was able to talk about that intelligently, and we immediately had the guy who had broke the news on it. You're going to be able to get all that stuff if you check out patreon.com/Gleeman. We would love to have you join us during the baseball season, and all kinds of ad-free. They're ad-free. We got mailbag, special episodes, special guests, etc. So
yeah, and it'll be $8 a month, and you'll get more than 8 episodes. Certainly during the season. So yeah, we're ramping up with that. We'll be doing, if you like this show that you're listening to right now, why not get 2 more every week? Just like it, and even better, because no commercials.
Yes.
Speaking of commercials, we want to thank our sponsors that, by the way, make this show free to listen to.
That's right.
Our presenting sponsor, first and foremost, Blackstack.
Yeah, Blackstack Brewing, now being distributed to all greater Minnesota, so stop by your favorite liquor store or the Blackstack Tap Room to grab your favorite brewer, try something new. You could stop by the Blackstack Tap Room on opening day, for instance, and if you sign up beforehand, you could even get yourself a free Blackstack beer as part of that. But also thank you to our other sponsors that helped make this Factor and Hims and RotoWire and Harry's Razors. We will be back a week from today, I think. No, probably a week from tomorrow. A week from Saturday. We will probably be back with a free episode. Then we're going to actually miss an episode after that. That's only going to be Patreon only. We've got some stuff going on that I'm going to be a little busy that week. So then you'll have to wait a couple weeks after that. So again, if you want more, patreon.com/Gleeman. We'll talk to you next week.
Gleeman and